Okay, Alexander, we have a lot of news breaking out of Turkey, and it involves one of our favorite people to discuss, the neocon war hawk, Mr. John Bolton. And John Bolton made a trip to Turkey. He met with Erdogan, and I'm going to read you a quote as to what Erdogan said about the meeting, and you can take it from there. I was shocked, and I think most of the world is shocked as to what Erdogan said. And I think there's a lot to read into it, and I'm trying to read your mind, and I think I know what you're going to say. But let's start with the quote and let you take it from there. So Erdogan said on Monday that we, being Turkey, we cannot accept Bolton's message given from Israel, adding that Bolton made a serious mistake. All right, Alexander, what do you make of that?
I think Erdogan is absolutely right. I think that what has happened is this. Donald Trump, a week or so ago, 2 weeks ago, made this decision that he was going to pull all the US troops out of Syria. And that would mean that obviously there would be an end to this interventionist war that the United States has been waging for all these years, with the objective ultimately of achieving regime change in Damascus. Bolton has been trying as hard as he can ever since then to go back on this. He's been trying to undermine and reverse Trump's decision. Now, he's been doing that by traveling around the Middle East and making all sorts of commitments to all sorts of people. He's made commitments to the Kurds that the United States will remain there until their position is entirely protected. He's made commitments to the Israelis, which is what Erdogan was referring to, which was that Israel's position would be protected from Iran. And, of course, he was also making commitments about how ISIS, the supposed reason for the US troops to be where they are in Syria, that ISIS would have to be completely destroyed. I mean, the United States has had years and months to finish off ISIS, and it hasn't done so. Now, Erdogan, whose telephone conversation with Donald Trump it was, which precipitated Donald Trump's decision to pull out of Syria, Erdogan, who is extremely concerned, as any Turkish prime minister or political leader would be, about what is Bolton's immediate project, which is to create this Turkish statelet under US protection and control in Syria so that he can go on destabilizing Syria. Erdogan is absolutely furious, and he said to Bolton's face, this simply will not do. And having said it in front of Bolton, he's gone off and he's now said it to his own people in Turkey. He's made it public. He's had an op-ed published in the New York Times in which he's basically saying the same thing. And though, as we've discussed in earlier programs, I think Erdogan himself would not be sorry to see the US withdrawal from Syria take place over a staged period of time. The one thing he is not prepared to accept is the US staying in Syria permanently and working to create this statelet in northeastern Syria with the Kurds, which which Erdogan and Turkey see as an existential threat to Turkey. So he made it absolutely clear to Bolton, and I'm sure that before very long he's going to be talking to Donald Trump and telling Donald Trump the same thing. And we're hearing reports that the Turkish military is now being prepared and that they may very soon start military action in northeast Syria, irrespective of what the US does or not.
Does this further solidify the case that Turkey is now completely aligned with Russia as to how to resolve the Syrian quagmire? And would Turkey's incursion into the north go against Russia's wishes? And does it play into the hands of a Bolton who, to me, it sounds like Bolton is just kind of running around the Middle East trying to just incite violence and cause trouble in Syria, and he really is working against Trump.
He is working against
Trump's instincts on this are correct. Get out.
They are absolutely correct. Every single analyst of a realist view that I have read in the United States says that he is correct. I think he is correct. I think most of the world thinks he's correct. The people who think he is wrong is the neocon foreign policy establishment in the United States and the neocon journalists you read in the American media and in parts of the European media, especially the British. Now, can I simply say this? I think that Erdogan has looked at the situation and compared the situation in Washington and the situation in Moscow. And I think what he realizes is that whatever deal he does with Putin and the Russians in Moscow, the Russians will see through. They may talk very straight to him from time to time. In fact, I'm sure they do. It may be also that they sometimes tell him things he doesn't like to hear. But when a deal is done, a deal is done. When a promise is made, that promise is kept. And I think from Erdogan's point of view, he knows that any agreement he reaches with the Russians is an agreement which can stick. What he sees in Washington is that Donald Trump says one thing, and John Bolton and the foreign policy establishment do another. Given how important this situation with the Kurds is for Turkey and for Erdogan, inevitably that is going to mean that he's going to increasingly trust the Russians on this issue and not trust the United States. And where there is no trust in a situation where a country like Turkey sees the situation as of existential importance to itself, I think that the Turks will very, very quickly start to take actions in northeastern Syria, which they can take, which will not be to the US's advantage. Now, can I say what I think that will be? I think that the Turks have been signaling over the last few days to the Russians that they are prepared to see the Syrian army and the Russian military police enter the Kurdish areas and essentially regain control of them. What the Turks at the moment want is to have a sort of border zone along their own border, across the border from Turkey inside Syria, a kind of, shall we say, a kind of buffer zone. I think that they will ask that from the Russians, and I think the Russians might concede it. In fact, they probably will concede it as a stage in order to get the Syrian army into these regions with Turkey's agreement and consent, because it is essentially a face-saving measure for the Turks. So I think that what Bolton is doing is he's setting up the scene for a deal to be done between the Syrians, the Kurds, the Russians, and the Turks. And the United States could very well find itself, yet again, being left out in the cold.
So the Turks would be happy to see the Kurds fold back under Syrian government authority. They don't have a problem with that.
No.
Yes, go on.
I think that Erdogan still has personal issues with Bashar al-Assad and with the government in Damascus, but he would absolutely prefer a situation where the Syrian government regains control of the Kurdish areas than one where the Kurds are allowed to set up an independent statelet in northeastern Syria under the protection of the United States. That, for Erdogan and for Turkey, is totally unacceptable. A deal with Damascus is not.
Why is Erdogan so against the United States and Bolton setting up, kind of taking the Kurds under their permanent watch? Does Erdogan innately understand that would mean the United States and Israel, who have supported the Kurds and actually do support de facto a Kurdish type of autonomous state, Does Erdogan understand that if that was to happen, then you are moving one step closer to the Kurds actually having some sort of autonomy and self-rule, which is an absolute no-go for Turkey under any circumstance? That's definitely clear.
He understands that completely. That is his concern. He has made it very clear that he understands it. He's spoken about it openly. He is also very, very angry that the United States in Syria is working with the YPG, the Kurdish militia, which he considers, that Turkey considers to be a terrorist organization, and which is associated with the PKK, which is a Kurdish militia group operating in Turkey itself, and which Turkey considers a terrorist group, and which is fighting the Turkish government. So he looks at what the United States is doing, and he sees that the United States, in pursuit of this objective of regime change in Damascus, is now actively working with people whom Turkey considers to be its enemies. And you are absolutely correct. For any Turkish government, not just for Erdogan, this is a red line. I mean, I've just been reading reports that the Turkish opposition, which is generally opposed to Erdogan on many things, has made it very clear that it supports him on this issue.
Yeah, and I think we have to be clear. Actually, as I go through many of the comments we do talk about Turkey, some of our commenters from Turkey always mention the fact that, yes, there's a large population of Kurds in the south of Turkey, and there are also Kurds in Syria, North Syria. And in the mainstream media, we hear the word Kurds kind of thrown around very, very flippantly. But there is a distinction, especially in Turkey's eyes, as to what the Kurds are inside of Turkey and what the Kurds are in Syria. And so I think you've clarified that distinction as to how Erdogan sees the situation and why it is an existential threat to have an autonomous region so close to a large indigenous Kurdish population within Turkey.
Yes, he will not allow a Kurdish region to be set up in northern Turkey, which could become
northern Syria.
In northern Syria, which could become a base area for the PKK Kurdish insurgency in Turkey. That is an existential threat to Turkey. No Turkish government will accept it. Erdogan absolutely won't. And he will be making that totally clear to Bolton over the last few days.
Right. I'm glad you cleared that up. It makes very simple and clear sense. Doesn't Bolton understand this?
I think he does understand it. I think that Bolton, like all of the neoconservatives, though he understands it, he's at the same time in denial about it. Bolton is somebody who's got very used to the idea that the United States should have whatever it wants. So he wants a Kurdish statelet in northern Syria. He wants to destabilize Syria. He wants regime change in Damascus, and he wants Turkey to remain a loyal ally and to go along with all of this, despite the fact that if he understood the region properly, he should realize that this is a red line for Turkey. If I may say, the United States has never really understood Turkey's interests throughout the Syrian conflict and has shown a consistent willingness to sacrifice them as it pursues its objectives in Damascus.
In our last video, Alexander, you made a very interesting comment in relation to Russia and Russia's role. You said, at this moment in time, all roads lead through and to Moscow. Does that statement, is it truer now more than ever?
Yes, it is truer now more than ever. I mean, what Erdogan has seen from Bolton is, as I said, that there is no road for Turkey through Washington. The only road that can work is one through Moscow. And certainly he's going to get less than he might have wanted at one time earlier in the Syrian conflict, when he might have had some ambitions of some kind of regime change in Damascus of his own, which would bring a government, a Muslim Brotherhood government, to power in Damascus, which would in some way have been beholden to Turkey. He understands that's not going to happen, but he also understands that the kind of government that's going to be set up in Syria is a better government for him than a situation where, as I said, there's a Kurdish statelet in northern Syria. And he also understands that he can rely on the Russians to protect Turkey's interests and to watch out for Turkey's interests in any deal that is done.
And finally, Alexander, because neocons and the war hawks very rarely give up so easily, what is Bolton's plan B in order to sabotage any type of Syrian peace?
I think it's very simple. I think he's going to try and keep those US troops in Syria, not just as long as possible, but indefinitely. He's going to try to undermine Donald Trump's executive order. And let's be very clear about this. Donald Trump has signed an executive order making this decision. He's not set out a timetable, but Bolton is going to try and spin it out for as long as he can so as to keep the troops there, and he's going to give warnings to the Turks not to act. What I think is going to happen is, as I said, the Turks and the Russians will get together and they'll do a deal which will involve the Kurds and the Syrians, and which the Kurds and the Syrians will also agree to. And I think that sooner or later, probably sooner rather than later, if this goes on much longer, Donald Trump is going to have enough, and then John Bolton will be out of a job.
Do you think Bolton may try to take it to a very dangerous extreme? For example, pushing Syria to do more airstrikes, pushing Israel, to do more airstrikes into Syria, perhaps signaling that a chemical weapons attack is okay, is not a bad idea, and kind of throwing out that dog whistle for a white helmets type of chemical weapons attack. Do you think Bolton will stoop to those levels to try and sabotage this?
The answer is yes. I mean, he's got that kind of form. I think that is what he's going to do. I think the problem he has, and I come back to what I said about chemical weapons attacks, I think that this time he will find that if he plays those sorts of games, he's not just going to have the Russians very angry and opposed to him, he's also going to have the Turks also, because for the Turks, regardless of what kind of manipulations Bolton plays, this is, as we said, an existential issue and a red line. And ultimately, it is the Turks who have the big army in the region, not the United States. And if they have Russia and indeed China behind them, then, as I said, the Turks over Bolton have a winning hand.
All right. Thanks for explaining a very complicated situation that we will be monitoring closely, because every day the news we get out of Syria is it's incredible. I don't have any other words for it. I never thought I would see Erdogan speak like that to someone.
No, nor did I.
John Bolton's position.
No, nor did I. I think that we have seen this game that Bolton and some other people in the United States have been playing of trying to undermine Donald Trump's orders. I think it is now blowing up in their faces. I think, as I said, they're enraging Turkey, and they're simply demonstrating to everybody in the region that the United States cannot be trusted in what policies it follows there and in what promises it makes.
Alexander Mercouris, Editor-in-Chief of the Duran, thank you very much. Guys, click on that subscribe button. Click on that notifications bell. Go to the Duran shop, pick up a t-shirt. It really helps us out a lot. And donate to our PayPal and Patreon pages. Links are in the description box down below. And you can also listen to this show in podcast format, iTunes and SoundCloud. And of course, you can go to the Duran.com and see the articles that Alexander is gracious enough to link to. All right. Thank you, Alexander. Until next time, everybody, take care.